So this is the book that I just finished. It's called Hacking Your Education. And it's all about how to learn outside of school. As I talked a little bit about yesterday, I didn't go to middle school or high school, and instead found mentors and built businesses and did internships and was really able to engage with my education in ways that I never would have been able to had I been in the classroom. And so when I left college 2 years ago, I set out to write this book, and it really became a fun exercise in thinking about what it was that I had done when I left school. Because it wasn't that I left school and had no systems, it was that I had to figure out how to build systems for myself, of how to keep myself accountable, how to keep myself on track, and how to keep myself interested in learning when I was outside of a system and didn't have teachers giving me assignments or grades or telling me what to do or watching over me all the time. And I ended up interviewing about 50 or so people who've done fascinating and awesome things with their lives without relying on formal education. And they've gone on to do everything from become doctors to lawyers to entrepreneurs to architects to DJs. Some of them went to school, some of them went to college, some didn't, some dropped out. But the common thread is that what they learned and what they do are two different things. To get where they are now, they did not rely on their formal education inside the classroom. And for me, the motivation in writing the book was really about helping people make informed decisions about how to educate themselves. We're in a really scary time when 22.5% of college grads in the States under 25 with college degrees are unemployed, and another 22% are working jobs that don't require their degree. And it's a really tough decision to decide to spend 4 years of your life and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars when the chances of you getting a job that actually uses your college degree are less than half, right? Particularly when the average college student graduates with $27,000 in debt, which is just astronomical and a huge amount of debt to start off life in the world with. And the amount of credit card debt has now, or the amount of student loan debt has now surpassed credit card debt. It's more than $1 trillion in the States. I think the thing that's really scarier still, though, is that student loan default rates are on the rise. And we're up 2% year over year to 11% by the end of 2012, and continue to rise. And the thing is, the thing that makes student loan debt different than, say, people defaulting on their mortgages is that at least with a house, there's something that a bank can repossess. There's an actual physical asset, right? I mean, the bank that has given you a loan on your education could theoretically take back your diploma, but it's not really of use to anybody else. And it's kind of hard to prove that that has value to anyone else. So it's definitely a really, really scary place to be. And I think a question of whether or not going to college is a good investment, that's really worth asking these days.
Well, I have a couple questions for you about the book, Dale. Of course, if you go to your website or different place where you've written op-eds and all that fun stuff, there are a lot of different myths about Dale Stevens and what uncollege is all about. So for the record, is Dale Stevens against university life and college?
I'm against people making decisions without thinking about them. If you want to go to college or university because you've made a choice about how you want to be there, because you want to work with a certain professor or work in a certain laboratory, because you want to enter, get a certain certificate, then more power to you. But it's about making that decision for yourself. It's not about whether or not you go to school fundamentally.
I guess further, just to follow up on that, how much, of course, it's an individual's decision how I'm going to hack my own education, but it sounds like it's really important to have certain people, a support network available as well. And I know you had your parents, so the people you interviewed, were they fortunate enough to have like awesome parents around them, or did some of them just figure it out on their own?
It depended. I mean, it was, some people had parents around them to support them, others didn't. It was really a question of making that decision for themselves. Most of the people that I interviewed who decided to leave school knew that they really fundamentally were not happy or healthy in a college environment, and knew that had they stayed in that college environment, they wouldn't have they wouldn't have been able to have survived, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really controversial subject because school is something that 99% of people have gone through, right? And it's something that's aspirational. Everyone tells us, from our parents to our teachers to our counselors, that college is something to aspire to. Particularly if maybe your own parents haven't gone to college. But it's something that's aspirational, not because anyone has decided that it is aspirational for any particular reason, but rather because that's what everybody does. And when everybody does something, that seems like a particularly bad reason to do something to me.
And what would you say you found in terms of the individuals you interview and even yourself when it comes to structure? Some people like to know they have to be somewhere at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock and in schedules like you have, say, in a traditional university or college system. Are all these people extremely detailed oriented? They have their calendars marked up every single day, or some just kind of go with the flow? And I'm curious how your experience has been. Have you been really structured, or you kind of just each day you wake up and figure things out?
I tend to be a fairly structured individual myself. I love calendars and making plans and scheduling and so on and so forth. But there are many people that I interviewed for the book who followed much looser structures or found ways to implement structure for themselves that wasn't at the same level of a college system. One person I interviewed, for example, decided that he was going to wake up at a certain time and convinced a number of his friends to do the same, and each morning at 6 a.m. they'd call each other to ensure that they all got up and could start learning at the same time every day.
Question about how you looked at this internationally. Like, what are the differences in hacking your education here in the U.S. where we are versus what's going on around the world? Because we have so many people who are joining us from different parts of the world.
It varies at what level we're talking about. And at the primary level, where schooling is compulsory in most of the world under the age of 16, it's something that's much easier to do in the States and much easier even to do on the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. In America, standards about homeschooling, which is what unschooling legally looks like, are dictated on a state-by-state level. And so in New York, for example, to homeschool, your parents have to have a master's degree, while in California, your parents just need to have a high school diploma. Whereas in most of Europe, homeschooling is just flat out illegal and just impossible to do. Once you get to the higher levels of looking at hacking education beyond beyond being 18, it has more to do with how you're able to access opportunities and jobs than the legality of it. And I think that's something that, because hacking education is still a fairly fringe topic, it has less to do with any particular geographic location. I think there might be a concentration of people in Silicon Valley, for example, who value meritocracy and who value what people know and what they've done more than their degrees. But there are definitely pockets of those, particularly people who work in startups and technology in different places all over the world.
Dale, your work specifically on college campuses and universities have been extremely controversial. What has been some of the feedback you've received from educators and university administrators, professors, and the like? What has been their one, say, jab at you, and how have you responded to it?
I've been less surprised by the responses of educators and administrators, and more surprised by the responses of students. Educators and administrators are generally aware that the school system needs to change and are generally supportive of school becoming more self-directed, right? They want their students to be engaged. They want their students to be learning. It's mostly students who feel like they're being told that their life choice is being devalued. You know, that they buy a car and they drive it off the lot, and you go up and tell them that it's just lost $5,000 in value. It's like, oh, that wasn't worth it. It's definitely challenging though, and while I can totally empathize with that, I mean, it would be really hard for someone to tell me that what I'm doing is maybe not the best investment of time. I think it's something that we need to consider, and I'm not saying that in a self-interested way, but because half of the world's population is under 30. And if you want to be able to find a way to navigate the world and not even succeed, but maybe even get a job and be able to support yourself, it would be challenging to do that if the only place that you've ever learned is inside a college classroom.
We have some questions coming in from the internet.
Awesome.
And one from In the Fireplace. I don't know if he's inside our fireplace here. How would you talk about uncolleging to more conservative parents?
I mean, it depends. I think the most successful appeals that I've seen to parents who are very set on their kids going to college is to really appeal to their child's happiness. Most parents generally want their children to be happy. They want them to be successful. And if a child is genuinely unhappy and unsatisfied and really feeling terrible in a school environment, it's pretty hard for parents to say, well, stick it out even if it makes you feel terrible and absolutely awful and hate yourself. There's a really great book called The Teenage Liberation Handbook, written by a woman named Grace Llewellyn in the early 1990s, that has a whole step-by-step guide to how to talk to your parents about leaving school. And outlines a number of different arguments that can be useful when talking with parents who share a different point of view. So I'd encourage that listener to check that book out.
We have another great question from online. This is from Steve Whitmore, 81. It's a really good practical question. Is the book, Dale, is it a narrative of your experiences and of your life, or is it a more practical book for readers?
The book uses my experience as a narrative basis, and there's 1 or 2 pages of that starts out every chapter, but it's pretty practical. The 50 or so people that I interviewed, I took their stories, I turned them into practical exercises, and at the end of every chapter there's something that you can do to build on those experiences and start making changes in your own life. Whether that's things that you want to do to help start building a portfolio, or building your network, or building your community, or building your mentors. There are all those sorts of exercises that are built into the book to try and get readers set on their own track, whether they're in school or whether they're outside of it.
We have a question from Chris who says, in your book, do you talk at all about how to go about finding opportunities abroad, like you did? I want to study Spanish in a Spanish-speaking country, and I don't even know where to begin.
The last chapter is all about learning from traveling. How to go about finding those experiences, how to go about setting yourself up so that you know what you want to learn and then can evaluate yourself down the line. And there's stories from, I think, 5 or 6 people in that chapter, from people who went all over the world, from India to Israel to Australia to Malaysia to somewhere in Latin America, Guatemala, I think. That has been, the strategies that they used and employed to find their opportunities, as well as the biggest learnings that they took away from their experiences.
Good question here coming in from Kelly J. Did you find anyone who had a very traditional job, such as a lawyer or professor, who achieved that profession without a college degree?
Yep, there's a lawyer, there's an architect who's part of the Academy of American Architects. There's a guy who's a vice president at Shell Oil. Some very traditional jobs, and people who got there in the same way. I think it's definitely easy to assume that people who are self-directed are sort of predisposed to being artists or entrepreneurs or freelance writers or filmmakers or something that's very independent. But there are numerous examples of people who went on to work in major corporations despite coming from a very non-traditional background.
I have a question for you, Dale. What was the most surprising thing that you learned from one of your interviewees? I know that's pretty generic, but
learned about myself or learned about?
Oh, I could go. I was thinking like, what surprised you the most that you?
I mean, I think the thing that surprised me the most was that people always say, well, this is only for very self-motivated people, right? And I think the thing that surprised me the most is that most of the people that I interviewed are pretty lazy. And for them, that meant that, not that they didn't do work, but that they always went to look for the highest value leverage opportunities. So they ended up doing less work, but they did work in more meaningful places. But they may not have worked as hard as someone who was going and writing 4-page English papers every week.
Here's an interesting question here from Eric Phillips that says, in the book, is there a ranking of locations that you feel have an environment that foster learning better or worse than others? I know you live in San Francisco right now. Have you found that certain geographic regions are like, yo, this is where you need to be an academic?
There's not ranking specifically about the learning environment. There is a couple pages of discussion about how different locations can be amenable to different things, right? The fact that if you want to go into technology, San Francisco might be a good place to be. But if you want to go into fashion, maybe you want to consider living in New York or London. If you want to be in media or entertainment, you should probably move to LA. If you're really into cars, like Detroit might be a good place, right? The fact that there are different industries that are centered in different places around the world, and if you are interested in pursuing a certain thing, it probably makes sense to move to that geographic location.
A statistic that a lot of people point to when they talk about, say, the uncollege movement or hacking your education is you can look at the statistics over the years, poor economy, student loan debt over $1 trillion, people are coming out, not getting jobs, moving back in their parents. You can go on and on with statistics, right? On the flip side, they say that the unemployment rate for people without college degrees is substantially higher than those with college degrees. So it seems like it's a weird double-edged sword. Do you have an opinion on that fact, on that number?
So the BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics number on the people who are unemployed without college degrees is for people over 25. And for people under 25, more now have college experience. More people have spent time in college than have not. And I think that's indicative that things are changing. And that BLS number is probably going to still be biased in favor of college graduates for another couple of years until the next 3 years when that class of people catches up. But I have a hard time believing that it'll stay the same.
Do you have a great example in the book that you found of someone, right now we're talking specifically about young people, recent college graduates, but someone who, say, and still in the young age of their 30s like I am, the 30s or say their 40s or 50s decided to hack their education after having a traditional career? And any great examples of people who did that after, say, living a more traditional experience?
Not that I can think of that are in the book necessarily, but I get dozens of emails every week from people who are in that specific place, who've done something interesting and productive with their lives that feel like they want to do something different and want to continue learning. If I think of a specific example, I'll call back to it later, but I don't have one off the top of my head.
Cool. Yeah. Any questions here in our studio audience about the book? And
how long did it take you to write it?
It took about 9 months to write, and then about another 6 to edit or so. It was a long process. I think it was fun to have the time to go back and think and introspect and think about what it was that I'd done. Yeah, it's a big undertaking. It definitely gave me a lot more respect for people who've written books.
Oh, go ahead, please.
What advice did you get from people before you started the book?
The advice that I got was mostly around, the structure of the book, of whether this was something that should be structured in a thematically, or whether it should be done chronologically, or the best strategies for keeping yourself on track. Whether I should do all the interviews and then write, or write up the interviews as I went, or commit to writing a certain number of words a day. In the end, I sort of did a mix of that. I tried to get my narrative down first, and then I did most of the interviews, and then sort of incorporated that. So went in cycles of researching versus writing. I think the thing this is the thing that was most surprising. The thing that was most surprising to me that no one warned me about was the physical amount of time that I would spend thinking about writing, and like actively thinking about writing, but not actually writing. Like sitting in front of my computer and thinking, oh, you know, should this word go there or there? Should that paragraph go there or there? And it was not wasted time because it was very active, an active part of the writing process, but it felt really unproductive because I wasn't actually producing anything.
There's a great question online coming from Steve Whitmore, 81, and he says, how can employers embrace or take advantage of people who take this route to learning?
Employers are starting to recognize that that what you can do means a lot more than the degree that you have, and we're particularly seeing innovation in the area of technology. And I'll talk more about this afternoon. There are a couple sites, one's called GitHub, one's called Behance, one's called Stack Overflow, that basically allow people to demonstrate their knowledge, engage with the community, and show off their skills, and then get a ranking comparing them to other people. And we're seeing all kinds of companies recruiting on these platforms, from big companies like Apple to small startups that you've never heard of. One thing that I think is particularly interesting is that Stack Overflow started as a Q&A site just for computer programmers, but is now part of a larger network of 96 different sites that cover everything from like plumbing to electricians to nursing to all sorts of different things. So they're quickly and actively moving in the direction of expanding beyond just the niche of technology.
Dan, what about the whole notion of college? Those are the 4, or for some people 5 or 6 years that you learn about yourself, and you kind of you gain independence, and you figure out how to be an adult and come into being. I think you wrote about this a bit on Uncollege and your Uncollege manifesto before this book came out. So what do you say to people that say college, or those 4, 5, 12 years are so important to grow up and become an adult?
I mean, I think the key emphasis there is on the 4, 5, or 6 years, and the fact that you're going to be more mature by the time you're 22 or 23 than by the time you're 18, right? I think how you spend that time is more or less irrelevant. And in fact, I think you'd grow up a lot faster if you took 4 years and went to live in India by yourself than, you know, if you spent 4 years sitting inside a college classroom where your room and board is paid for, someone's cleaning your bathroom and cooking your meals, right? That's a pretty nice way to live, but it's not going to help you grow up.
Cool. Maybe we just have a couple more questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they continue to come in, but I think there are a couple people asking about how to demonstrate and show our learning to potential employers. Blog it, document it. What's best? It's something we touched on yesterday, but maybe as it relates to the book. Yeah,
for sure. The best way to do that is to create portfolios, which we're going to talk about in depth this afternoon, and even go through a template of what you should include and the steps that you need to take to create a portfolio. The beauty about the internet is that you can show off what you've done, not just talk about it, right? On a resume, all you can do is write down what you've done. And online, you can put up photos, you can put up videos, you can link to the different projects, you can show how you engaged with other people. And that's just far more meaningful and telling about your talents than a single piece of paper ever could be.
Any more questions here in the audience?
How did you decide what to put in and what to leave out of your book? Because I feel like it's easier to make like a 500-page book than it is to make like a 100-page.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of that was helped by my editors that I had, both my editor at Penguin, Maria Gagliano, and then an editor that I hired to help, Justin Keenan. I did a lot of A/B testing of the book, of bouncing it off of people. People who were part of the Uncollege community online got early versions and drafts to see what was relevant and what was helpful. Ultimately, I wanted to make something that was readable, that wasn't a 500-page tome. It's definitely easier to be verbose, but harder to be concise.